I'd like to welcome you all to our final Disability Champions event for 2022. Thank you for attending, and as you'll be aware, we try to organise these probably at least every quarter to try and engage with our champions and to bring issues forward that you have requested, that you feel that we need to be maybe raising awareness on, or try to tie them in around whatever particular day it is on the disability calendar. But today we have, and I'd like to welcome Stephen McGlue, who works for the Department of Communities. And Stephen is pretty much steeped in the disability work that the department are taking forward and disability strategy. So I'll not hold you back too long, because I know we're conscious we're all tied to time these days, and especially during lunch hours. So Stephen, I'll just hand over to you, and if you want to take it forward.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks to everybody, I suppose, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about something that's really important to me. I should say, just before I share a screen, probably an apologies to Tina. Tina, you've probably seen some of these slides, I don't know, 400 or 500 times by now, so maybe next time you'll deliver them, who knows. So I'll just share the slides and we'll get into it, folks. Okay, so as Tina said, so I'm Stephen McGlue from the Department for Communities, and I'm head of disability and work. I'm responsible for setting disability and work strategy and policy for Northern Ireland. So I suppose today what I'll do is give me about maybe 20-25 minutes. I'll talk a bit about where we are with the new disability and work strategy. I'll cover the progress we've made on the strategy, talk about some really in-depth labour market research that we commissioned to inform our work, both statistical, qualitative and quantitative. And then I'll go a wee bit deeper into the strategy, the structure of it, and then emerging themes, and then also the emerging actions of the strategy. And then very happy for all questions, comments, any thoughts, all very welcome, folks. So if I talk about, I suppose, where we are in terms of development of the strategy, context that I'll say is that previously in disability and work strategies, I think the department has taken the more standard approach of setting a 5-year strategy and an action plan at the same timeline. And when you come to the end of that, reviewing the progress and then doing another. For this strategy, we want to do something very different, I suppose, just because disability employment is an issue that we've had in Northern Ireland, and economic activity is an issue that we've had in Northern Ireland for so long. The cycle, we thought we'd try and disrupt it a little bit. So what we really set out when we started this process was to think about what a long-term commitment to increasing the disability employment rate would look like and how we would do that. We started with a policy analysis looking at the approach across the various UK regions to think about what they're doing, their status in the labour market, and any interventions that seem to be making real headway. We commissioned really extensive labour market research that I'll present on today. It covered a wide range of demographics of disability, a lot of intersectionality, the gender, age, the skills levels, the location that it covered, even elements of pay gap and so on. So we have a really extensive piece there. I won't go into all of the depth that's available for people to read, and you might have been aware of the recent University of Ulster kind of supplement that's then taken it to a more updated position for this year. We're also doing the same thing to keep the strategy really well informed about it. We held a range of co-design sessions with a wide range of stakeholders. To date, we've held, I think, more than 60 hours worth of focused kind of group work on the action plan to develop actions, themes, and really then start to sense check them a little bit. And where we are at the minute is really just between the 4th and 5th box, where we've included a lot of that external co-design. We're now looking internally at the strategy and thinking about sense checking it with business area leads, thinking about resourcing needs and challenges that each action would have, and really understand what is doable and what is not. Can I just check? I think there's maybe a couple of people might need to mute. Just I'm aware of the recording. Just if people could maybe check, it would be helpful. In terms of the labour market research that we commissioned, so very much look at the labour market from the sense of employment outcomes. How do people with disabilities compare to those without disabilities? The barriers and challenges those people face in finding and staying and progressing in employment. We looked at COVID-19 because of it was obviously a very current topic, and it had impacts and it changed the way that we were working as employers. So there's an element on that. And then very much the views from employers, from our disability sector, and from those with lived experience of disability about the type of interventions they would like to see. But with that said, let's talk a little bit about the data. So in terms of the kind of prevalence of disability in Northern Ireland, I suppose the first thing to say is in Northern Ireland, it's about 1 in 5 have a disability. So if you think about it, every family, every circle group, every workplace is touched by disability. You cannot escape from it. We are pretty comparable in terms of the UK regions. They're all dancing in around about 20%. We're at 21.3. Since between 2014 and 2020, Northern Ireland and Wales has seen a smaller increase in those prevalent rates than Scotland and England. That could be a range of factors. That should be data pre-COVID, so it shouldn't really be impacted by the COVID piece. But again, these are stats that we'll update right before we launch the strategy, hopefully. In terms of breaking that down into age category, something that's quite interesting for Northern Ireland versus the other regions is that for the younger age categories, sort of under 24s and under 34s, we actually have by far the lowest prevalence of disability. In some places we are 3 points better off, in some places we are 6 points better off than the other UK regions. But that then starts to change with the older categories. So 35 to 49, it's pretty comparable. It's a pretty even basis of about 18 percentage points of representation in the 35 to 49. The 50 to 64 is where it skews quite heavily towards Northern Ireland. In some places we are 3 percentage points higher, in some places we are 6 percentage points higher. So really what that is saying is for the Northern Ireland picture, within those younger age categories, considerably fewer disabilities, starts to level off at one of that sort of middle-aged category, and then really starts to spike within that older age category. There's a bit of that you would expect, that the old age categories would have more disabilities, because the longer you live, the more opportunity and time there is to acquire a disability or for your health condition to worsen. So that's understandable, but it's just showing that it's skewing much more for Northern Ireland than the other regions. In terms of then going right into employment, I suppose, so our employment gap, depending on the quarter that you look at it from NISRA, is about 45, 46 percentage points. So about 1 in 3 people with disabilities are in employment, and about 81% of those without disabilities are in employment. That's a trend that has been long-standing, and we are significantly higher than all of the other UK regions. When you think of economic inactivity, we often talk about economic inactivity within the labour market as the issue that we need to try and address and activate that group. I'm very, very biased towards those with disabilities, but what we did with the labour market research, we distilled disability out of economic inactivity and really did the comparison. So in general, economic inactivity in Northern Ireland is about 7 percentage points above the UK rate. When you distill disability out of that, we become much more even with the UK. So 2 percentage points of a difference when you take disability out of that. But when you compare the disability economic inactivity rates between Northern Ireland and the UK, we are 17, 18 percentage points worse in Northern Ireland. So the message that I am saying every time I deliver slides like this is, if you want to change the curve on economic inactivity, disability is the group that you should be focusing on, your support. The research also looks into how people are performing by health condition and qualification. And again, it does the comparison between Northern Ireland and the UK. The headline here, I suppose, for each condition is that the red bars on the left-hand side and the navy on the left-hand side. Northern Ireland is red, UK is navy. We are worse in every condition than the UK equivalent. So these are, apples and apples being compared here. It is the same condition, but performance is much worse in Northern Ireland, where we are particularly for sight and hearing loss, which is nearly 25 percentage points lower, and disabilities affecting limbs and spinal, which is 16, 17 percentage points lower. The worst, just to note, is mental health. That is the lowest expectancy of employment out of all of these categories of condition. Looking at qualification, so again, it's disabled versus non-disabled and Northern Ireland versus UK. If I just talk about Northern Ireland people with disabilities, the blue bar there really is qualification at degree and above. We have about 2/3 of that category who are in employment. But when you compare that to the UK rate, we are 6 percentage points lower. And what that is telling us is really that we are not converting even those people at the most highest level of qualification into employment at the same rate as UK regions are. Now, there's still a huge drop-off between disabled and non-disabled people in Northern Ireland. There's still 23 percentage points of a difference, I think. But even comparing the people with disabilities in the different regions, we are lower. If I just touch on the red bars there, which is below degree level qualification, but above, but still having acquired a qualification, that includes qualifications such as A-levels and GCSEs. This is the area where we are really not transitioning people into employment in the same as they are across the UK. We are nearly 14 percentage points lower in that conversion than the other UK regions, which just shows that there are people with the capability of acquiring these qualifications and skills. We are not helping them with that transition into employment as effectively as the other UK regions. In terms of pay gap, so the first thing to say, I suppose, is it's very well established Northern Ireland has a lower rate of pay than other UK regions, and it's true for those with disabilities as well. There is a very well established disability pay gap. Now, what I would say is for somebody with a disability living in Northern Ireland versus the average across the UK, you can expect to earn about £310 less per month. If you just think of Northern Ireland, somebody with a disability versus somebody without a disability, you can expect to earn about £400 less per month. Health warning around those stats is that we believe that it's mostly due to people with disabilities working fewer hours due to their condition, but also occupying a greater proportion of entry-level jobs, lower skilled jobs and lower paid jobs, as opposed to somebody working the same job as a person without a disability and being paid less. That's what we understand to be the case, but I understand there's also some very deep research into the disability pay gap that I'm going to a piece on in a week or two, so I'll know more about it then. But I suppose the point that I would make about the pay gap piece is if you have a disability in Northern Ireland, you can expect to earn less than your equivalent maybe in the UK. But when you think of the rates of welfare, they're the same across the UK regions. So there's almost a slight disincentivization for those with disabilities in Northern Ireland to take the risk and upset their current circumstances to move into employment because you'll expect to earn less potentially. So it's another barrier that people are trying to work with, really. The last real slide that I'll talk about in terms of empirical evidence, the research also goes into the sector that the people with disabilities are represented within. This bar chart really is a case of a comparison against the disability employment average gap. So above the line is a sector performing better, below it's worse. In Northern Ireland, what we're doing well is, as you'd imagine, public administration and very much that hospitality sector. Where we're doing particularly poorly compared to the UK is manufacturing, construction. So those skilled roles really. And again, as I say, these are people with disabilities compared in both regions. We are 6 percentage points worse off in manufacturing than the disability employment rate, and I think we're about 4 percentage worse than the UK average. And for construction, we're 4% worse than the UK than the disability employment rate, and I think 2.5–3% worse than the UK rate. So there's a lot of margins there that we need to try and close where we can. There are definitely skews towards some sectors being more appropriate or accommodating or applicable to those with disabilities, but there's still a gap there that we can change because we can see it in the UK that it's working for some where it's not in Northern Ireland. The summary of the data I've kind of presented there, I suppose, 1 in 5 in Northern Ireland with disability, our disability employment rate is about 35 percentage points. We're the worst performing region in the UK across all skill levels and all conditions. The earnings piece that I talked about, somebody expecting to earn £310 less in Northern Ireland than they would in the UK. or £400 less than somebody that doesn't have a disability in Northern Ireland. And then ultimately the pitch that I have made to a lot of employers and other bodies that will listen to me is that employment is about 70% at the moment. Unemployment is about 3%. Economists would tell you that is basically full employment. If our economy wants to grow, if employers have vacancies and skills requirements that they're trying to meet, the economic and activity group is the only real source of that labour if we cannot import it. So that's really the pitch that I would make to employers, that this makes sense both in an inclusion perspective, but also from an economic growth perspective. The research I mentioned went into qualitative evidence gather, so we did a range of focus groups with employers, the disability sector, and those with lived experience. We actually did a number of one-to-one interviews with those with disabilities. They talked about elements of finding employment, staying in employment, and the likes of interventions that they would like to see. I won't touch on all of these, but I suppose in terms of finding employment, and these are combined across those three groups that I talked about, very much the barriers and challenges that were being faced. Specific health condition and the disability impacting or limiting the person. It's very understandable. There was one around lack of confidence and that more emphasis needed to be placed on soft skills and confidence building. One around lack of employer awareness and that there was a perceived cost of the impact of adjustments, and in some ways people with disabilities in the disability sector felt that could be myth-busted quite easily. There were issues with traditional recruitment practices and lack of flexibility of employers. Calls for greater support, and then there was a call as well about fear of disclosure of disability because there could be a negative stereotype or response from an employer or colleagues. And then the last one we will never escape is inflexibility within the benefit system, which is acting as a huge barrier. The interesting thing between these were the barriers and challenges to finding employment. When you move to staying and progressing employment, the same themes come up. So the orange boxes there were boxes that were represented on the previous page. So the health condition element, the lack of confidence, the lack of employer awareness, calls for greater support, and the fear of disclosure were common themes throughout all of these stages. The additions that really came up from the staying and progressing employment were one very interesting one was that people with disabilities can become comfortable or secure in the environment that they're in, and they may choose not to progress. Now that's a right that everybody has, so it's something that we can't disrupt, but really our target around this entire strategy is for those that want to, or those that maybe feel with the right support that they at some stage would want to progress. That's where we need to be. There was a very similar one linked to that where it was about general lower levels of skills attainment and lack of ongoing skills development that was holding people back from progressing. Very much that once somebody moved into a role, they felt they were not getting the same opportunities to progress because of a lack of skills. And that would align with the lower pay rates and the higher proportion of lower skills and entry-level jobs. The last one was one about disrupting the current status quo that the person has, that people can become very comfortable and think this is good enough for me. I don't want to apply to a new employer, or I don't want to progress because I could upset my current circumstances. So I may lose touch with the friends that I have in my workplace. I may not get the same adjustment. I could move to another employer and take ill, and I have experience with my current employer, and I've maybe the comfort that I know that if I took ill and I was off for a while, they would support me. I may not have the same money in the bank with a new employer. Those kind of fields. So those are very much the issues that are coming forward in terms of finding and staying and progressing in employment from our qualitative evidence gathering. Interventions that came forward. Suggestions around a more flexible benefit system, greater flexibilities in recruitment approaches, a positivity campaign around workplace awareness, a disability confidence scheme for Northern Ireland, greater emphasis on careers and specialist all-age provision, looking at incentives for people with disabilities and employers across skills and employment. And one that stood out to me was from employers actually around a more approachable disability sector. Very much the feeling from employers was that quite often the disability sector is aligned towards the individual as opposed to supporting the employer as well. And they felt that it was quite combative at times, that relationship. So just one that stood out to us. In terms of the actual strategy, so the work that we've done to date, I talked a wee bit about it before. Desktop research, we've done then labour market research, and we've done engagement with the UK and Republic of Ireland administrations. We've done a wide-ranging co-design series. We did a deep dive with the Skills Council. You'll understand later when you see the themes around skills. And we've drafted a narrative that's going through quality review. Where we are at the moment, we've just delivered the final co-design sessions, and we're starting to actually look at some initiatives themselves and any early work we could do around some of them. We're modelling a long-term commitment based on most recent economic forecasts, and we are just continuing to develop the action plan really. Forward piece, we will need to go through an internal quality review process. Very soon, we will start to hit barriers, I suppose, or challenges with a lack of an executive in place to think about public consultation. Now, I'm not certain of that at the moment. We do not know what powers permanent secretaries may have, but there is a potential challenge approaching us soon. And that's obviously works hand in hand with the difficult budget position that we may have in Northern Ireland and our ability to actually deliver a lot of the initiatives in the next year to 2 years or commence them in that time frame. So those are the I suppose the health warnings around future progress of the strategy. But very much I think the intent is that we will take it as far as we can, as quickly as we can, to really deliver or have it ready for an incoming minister. In terms of the actual strategy and the structure, so I talked before, a 10-year commitment. We're currently modelling the what that commitment will be, but we're modelling scenarios that look at something in the region of a 10 or 15 percentage point increase in the disability employment rate. That would bring us broadly in line with the UK average. That's not an aim for us, but it's just they're nice round numbers that we're scenario planning at the minute to understand what numbers that would mean supported into work and retained from work every year. The disability employment rate will be our top level population indicator. But below that, we have a series of sub-indicators we've developed. One's around pay gap, age boundaries, the gender piece, condition that the person has, underemployment and self-employment. I suppose the feeling around those population level sub-indicators is we don't just want to move one level, one number. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a quality way. We could move the employment rate, and that could mean that people are moving into 0-hour contracts or working very few hours. Some that will be right for, but for the majority, that will not change the pay gap, for example. So we want to try and do it in a way where we're seeing more people with disabilities retained in the labour market, but also progressing into it, whilst also doing it in a quality way. The emerging themes from co-design that we have identified are very much personalised support, which is aimed at the individual, enabling and supporting employers, which is about the employer, and then a third theme around inclusive skills, career progression, and guiding transitions. We also have identified a number of strategic enablers, we're calling them, which is about how we do things with the strategy and the various initiatives we take forward. So policy mainstreaming, co-design, that's very much how we will develop the policy and how we will do it in partnership with a lot of the stakeholders co-design to deal with. Listening and communicating, very much about awareness campaigns, about comms around the strategy itself, successes, case studies, those kind of pieces. Leading by example, very much the public sector piece around the public sector being at the front and centre of a lot of this. And then one around research, stats and measuring outcomes. Very much about, so we have scoped out a potential research series, so continued labour market research and data collection, statistics and presenting them in a transparent way, and then ultimately reporting and monitoring of the strategy. That's really the piece that I think we haven't done before really well, and it's something that we need to place more emphasis on. In terms of the strategy itself, this is my last real slide, folks, but I'll spend just a little bit of time on it. So I've talked about the structure of the strategy, but I'll go a little bit deeper into the actual action plan under each theme. For personalised support, very much aimed at the individual. So some of you will be aware in the department, we've already commenced work to refresh our in-work support provision. So that's a piece to replace access to work and workable and almost combine it into a more flexible and agile provision. So that's one that's there, that's actually commenced already, and it's due to launch in, I think, April 2024. So April next financial year. There's another action around pre-employment support. A lot of you will be very familiar with the current situation around the European Social Fund ending and Shared Prosperity Fund coming in. So we have an action in there that looks at a mainstream pre-employment support. That is some years away, so it's not something that will come in and address the immediate issue that's ongoing around European Social Fund. But if approved and we had the funding for it, that would be our intention, that we look at a pre-employment support piece which helps pan disability and those furthest from the labour market as well to move towards it. So it's not just about helping those closest to the labour market. Have a more conversation. Many of you will be aware of it from pre-pandemic, and some of the conversations that currently happen with work coaches. We think that we can do that in a more in a deeper way, I suppose, with those that are economically inactive on an entirely voluntary basis. Obviously, the Chancellor's announcement about move to UC has impacted that action slightly, because what we thought that would have really supported was the move to UC in the next 2 years for those that are on employment support allowance. It turns out that will be a later process, but there will still be some that are transitioning to UC. So we see that not only as being really helpful for those that are currently on universal credit but are not participating in the labour market, and those that will be joining and will have the anxiety and the uncertainty of joining. So that is something that we would like to see, based on the resourcing and funding and approval, obviously, something that we think could change that economic and activity picture. It's about talking to the individual and understanding the barriers and challenges they're facing, and thinking about local provision that may be available to support them to move along their health journey and manage their condition better, but ultimately start to think about employment on an entirely voluntary basis, but one where there are people in the labour market that are economically inactive that are telling us under the right circumstances we would like to work. We aren't currently, I think, giving them enough support in that area, specifically to this group. So that's what that action is about. There's another one about work and wellbeing hubs. Again, something that was started pre-pandemic but never really got to the full implementation. That's about local provision coming into offices and taking some of that provision out into more community spaces to really do much more of a wraparound provision for those with disabilities and health conditions. So that would be much more collaboration and partnership working with those local providers. Under enabling and supporting employers, we held a workshop earlier this week on very early design of a trust inclusion scheme for employers. So that was back to the call for Disability Confident for Northern Ireland as an action. So trust inclusion is the title that we are using, or the working title we're using. Tina was at it earlier in this week. But very much that is about supporting employers to grow their awareness of disability, to understand best practice, to learn from other employers that are maybe a bit further on that inclusion space, but ultimately to be more inclusive in their employment practices. We would see a range of products and support resources made available to employers. We would see an online gateway for them to both manage their account through an accredited scheme, but also to access all the provision that we would be developing for them. And as I said, we would see validation. So a combination of self-validation and then independent validation to give them an accreditation, really. Very much, I'm sorry about the title, but we have titled a staff resource that would support the scheme as Disability Champions, but ultimately Trust Inclusion is a working title right now. We may change it, so Disability Champions may up for grabs as well. I know that this group really has the same title there. That's really our flagship intervention for enabling and supporting employers, and we see it being the one that, again, wraps around employers and gives them the best support possible to try and change their own working practices, but really be a more welcoming environment for those that are thinking of entering the employment, retaining employment, or progressing in employment. Under skills, careers, and guiding transitions, this is very much being developed really closely with the Department for the Economy, and a lot of these actions are actually owned by them. These focus very much on ensuring accessible skills, training, apprenticeships, and further education provision for those with disabilities. It's looking at skills and academies for higher value jobs. So very much thinking about that progression piece, or entry at a graduate level for those that have graduate degrees and so on, rather than no skill, no pay positions. An approach to lifelong learning, which is obviously really important for those with disabilities. If you think of that older age category I talked about, and the development of disabilities and worsening of conditions as people get older, that approach to lifelong learning means that where somebody has to reskill for whatever the reason is, whether to stay in their current sector and role or to move sectors, that support should be available to them if they want it. Careers is obviously really, really important for those with disabilities. I think it's important for everybody, but particularly as well those in a special educational needs setting. And that works really around the transitions piece, helping those people on that kind of 14 to 19 journey who are fast approaching exiting education and thinking, what's next for me, whether that's further higher or into employment. That's the transition that we need to probably get a bit better at managing. Again, if you think of the qualifications levels that I talked about in the transition into employment, we aren't just achieving the same as the UK. So that's a really critical point that we need to try and manage a bit better. That's really the action plan in a little bit of a nutshell. There are, I think, in the region of about 30 actions overall. I can't cover them all today, but these are very much the ones that we would see as some of the main ones to really talk to stakeholders about. You'll be glad to hear that's the end of my slides. I'm very happy to have a discussion, do a Q&A, and really just take any opinions at all about the strategy, the labour market research, and the work that we've done to date. Just before I finish, I suppose I should say, I know that I joked earlier about Tina having seen these slides several times before and been engaged in the co-design piece and then some of the other sessions that we'll be doing. The approach that we've taken around the strategy is that co-design is really, really important. Buy-in from stakeholders is really important, and the experience and information that they can share and perspectives they can share with us around these actions and the direction of the strategy, and is it hitting really the people that we're really trying to support. I think that's just really, really important. So just probably a bit of a personal thanks to the union, but also the wider kind of congress of unions that I know have been involved in the work to date. And I think this is the second time in the last year that I've had an opportunity to present to a group like this. So thanks for the opportunity, and happy for any questions and discussions.
And obviously, as trade unionists, it is part of our campaign, I should say, is to ensure that there's more disabled people in work, and when they get in work that they're retained, because as union reps, a lot of us, we all work in the public sector. We cover civil service, health, education, local government, and a few other areas. So we're very conscious that we're all representing very large employers in the north, and unfortunately we do see the difficulty it is to, once a person becomes disabled while in work or their disability progresses when they're in work, it's very hard for us to get them the proper support and to make sure that they're retained, because especially in the civil service, my experience has been it's the length of absence they've been off regardless of their condition. And I think that's something we need to really work to improve, and also better awareness of reasonable adjustments in work, because I think that's where we're seen to be missing out on a lot for staff. Is firstly, they don't know what can be done for them, and secondly, their managers don't always know what can be done for them. So we're trying to improve that awareness. See, Roisin has a question in the chat. I think you might have covered it there in your last part about cross-departmental discussion on the skills and confidence issue with DFE as well. So you are working closely with DFE, aren't you?
Yeah, it's actually something I'm very pleased about, because when you start something like this and you think of the budget position, you don't always know exactly what buy-in you'll get. Department for Economy have been excellent the whole way through. They have worked very closely with us, and as I say, there's one of the three themes is almost entirely owned by Department for Economy. So they're very bought in, which I'm really pleased about. There's been other engagement as well. I'll just very quickly say, so Department for Education, Department of Health as well. You think of the 14 to 19 strategy, the 10-year mental health strategy, the autism strategy, the skills and 10X strategies as well. They're all very closely interlinked with what we're trying to do here. So it's really important that collaboration happens, but we've had quite a good level of support from any departments that we've asked for it from.
That's good. Now we just need to get the ministers in place to keep them going.
If you can do that, that would be great. But look, as I say, we will definitely not let that be a barrier if we can work right up to that or beyond that. That's the way we'll be doing this.
That's good. Anybody, if you want to raise your hands or else put the comments into the chat, I'm happy to bring you in or raise a question on your behalf. Yep, go ahead, Geraldine.
Thanks, Tina. Stephen, thank you so much for your presentation. And clearly there's a lot of good evidence base there in terms of your qualitative and quantitative research that you've gathered. But you did touch on potential challenge associated with the political uncertainty and the fact that there's no programme for government and lack of budget, and that you will take this strategy to its advanced stage and wait and see in terms of the appointment of a new minister to the department. So there is concern, we've seen this in the past, Stephen, where the co-design groups are working very hard in the development of strategies. And, you know, even if we look at our LGBTQI+ strategy, once a new minister comes into play, sometimes the work associated with that goes by the wayside. So what's your feeling in relation to this particular strategy? Are you confident no matter what or who is appointed as a minister, it will be very much taken forward and the work will not be disregarded in any way in terms of the co-design group? Yeah,
so the political situation is what it is. We can't impact that. What I will say is it's not currently holding us back. We aren't ready. We aren't sitting there with a public consultation ready to go. So that isn't a barrier for us right now. It's just it's on the horizon. That's something we're aware of. We're months away from that, I would say, before we start really feeling that it's holding us back. In terms of confidence in the work that is there. So I suppose the approach that we have always taken is that disability is a non-political issue. It is something that every party actually agrees on, really, now to different extents potentially. But we've always had the comfort that I mean, I led the delivery of the Harkin Summit back in June in Belfast, and we had cross-political buy-in to that International Disability Summit because people recognise the labour market conditions for people with disabilities and they saw the value in it. I've never heard anybody say to me this shouldn't be a priority, which is really comforting. My hope is that the work that we've developed, we have done it on, as you say, really deep empirical evidence. We have done really extensive co-design as well with a wide range of stakeholders. So it's informed by the data and it's informed by the opinions, really. My hope is that any incoming minister would look at the piece as it is, that there's always room for tweaks and changes. There's always challenges that need to be considered. Budget position, for example. I mean, one thing I will not shy away from is there's spend in this strategy, and we are facing difficulties with the financial position, but there's spend in this strategy. There's staff time and there's actual capital investment, and then there's program spend. If we don't get that, it limits the ambition of the strategy, I suppose. So there's a lot of plates spinning, I would say. I'm hopeful that the work that we've done on the evidence base we've gathered makes the case for why these are the right things to do. And certainly, I think I said it earlier, the buy-in from officials, senior officials within the department is really strong. So I'm very confident with what we've maybe set out within the strategy. I just hope that we have the budget to really achieve what we want to try and achieve is probably the answer. Lorna, I know you have your hand up.
Yeah, you mentioned a combination of workable and access to work happening early next year. For those that are currently availing of those services, will they still have a continuity of service? Because there are certain people who have particular caseworkers and so on. Will that be able to continue, or will there be any change to those people?
I would expect, I'm not in the project that's delivering the in-work support base, so their plan at the moment is that would come in from April 2024. the continuity piece is like the top priority, really, because there are people that will be on that scheme should it end, those schemes should it end, and that they either need to be transitioned into in-work support, or could there be an option around tapering it down until somebody leaves the scheme. I would imagine it would be transitioned. I would say as well, not to preempt the outcome of whatever new support would be available, but there are organisations currently delivering access to work and Workable who have experience of that. There's a very small pool of those organisations that would be bidding and want to deliver it. There's a very good chance that a lot of those organisations will be delivering new provision as well. So I would hope that continuity piece would continue, Lorna, but it's just a wee bit too early and they haven't made a decision on it yet.
Trust inclusion event on Tuesday, Stephen, someone had pointed out that some of the things we're talking about here, there used to be within Department of Employment and Learning or Education, DEL, I can't remember what DEL stood for. There used to be disability employment officers that are no longer in existence, you know, and obviously they were a great help and a great support too for DFC staff and DSD staff who are trying to get people into the workforce. Is there room within the strategy of maybe having that back or looking at re-including them into the scheme?
So we don't have that as an intervention in the action plan at the moment, Tina. I think the policy decision from Universal Credit at the moment is that they want work coaches to be general as opposed to specialists, but I think we do have youth work coaches at the moment. So there's no action at the moment to introduce specialist disability employment advisors. I do see merit in that, if I'm honest with you, but it's not something that's come up as something that Universal Credit is saying we want to do. I think quite often with a lot of these ideas is that they are good ideas and they're cyclical. It's almost like fashion. They come back into fashion again. So I would not be surprised if at some stage we do have something specialist. I think they have in the DWP now as well. So I think they've reintroduced a role under a different name, very similar. To just, I'm going to go on beyond your question, but to clarify for everybody here, I suppose the disability champions that I mentioned, that we may have to change the name because there's other disability champions on the screen. They would not be dealing directly with any participants, just in case that was confusing for anyone. They would be focused directly towards the employer and very much about supporting that employer when they're on trust inclusion. So they would be supporting them with self-assessment, building an action plan, helping to build connectivity with other support that's available, and then looking at the validation piece. They would not be engaging with their staff or those that are unemployed and so on. They'll be just directly focused on the employer and support organisations they make linkages to.
Thanks. It just, and then for your information, the trade union movement, I think it started possibly in England, is the disability champion movement. We have like 3-day training courses to give reps an awareness of the DDA and how they can use the reasonable adjustment process to get adaptations in work, or to maybe reduce hours, or to just maybe in some cases working from home, you know. So it is to champion the cause on behalf of the disabled people and to try and use that within our representation. So that's where the disability champion movement has come with in the trade union movement. I think there's actually a training course on at the moment, isn't there, Geraldine, or due soon? Any other questions?
If I just come back on that, Tina, look, if I'm very honest with you, the trust inclusion piece, so I would want those staff to be really informed about reasonable adjustments and solutions and how to get past barriers and best practice and so on. So there will be an element where we will be offering training to employers, e-learning resources and so on, but I want those staff trained. So it may be even, I haven't heard of another team like your disability champions going through training like that. It may be something that I maybe come back and ask for a wee bit of learning on, if that's okay. I mean,
go to Geraldine.
Well, Geraldine, I might come to you looking for a bit of advice at some stage, but that would be very appreciated if possible.
Okay.
No problem at all, Stephen.
Jackie?
Sorry, finding it harder to unmute. No, I just wanted to say I'm actually on the Disability Champions training course at the moment. So I am.
That's good.
Yeah, it's really good. So it is. We're learning, and we're actually looking at possibly maybe setting up a steering group of to actually help each other, why to keep it going after after the course is finished. It's something that's very close to my heart because I have a disability. So it's something that I really want to learn about and really want to get on board with. So it is. The one thing I wanted to ask was, is there any dealing with the Department of Education about informing people whenever they are still at school, the way they used to have careers advice? Is there anything like that now that that actually steers people into employment and explains to them that that there are ways of having reasonable adjustments, that there are ways of actually accessing work, even if they have a disability?
So there is careers, and sorry, I'll start from the start, I suppose, Jackie. So part of the conversation we've had with Department for the Economy, who has the career service in their policy space, yes, in schools, but I think it's under Department for Economy. We have engaged them. There's an action there around considering the career service, especially those in special educational needs settings. So those in with a SEND statement, basically, to think about the type of careers advice that should be tailored towards people with different conditions and disabilities. So I think that is really, really important, because something that I find from working in this area, and then through the research, but more so just personal experience of working in this area, is that quite a lot of people with disabilities, when they were younger or currently, their ambition is quite often stifled. People quite often, limit it and say, you might want to be this, but maybe this is more achievable for you and you should go into this. And sometimes that's good advice depending on the circumstances. Sometimes it's not necessarily. So there's an element of that careers advice which I think is so important. I actually think that's something that we need to change so that we stop people falling out of that transition from education into employment. I think that's a really crucial point, and that's why it's in the theme itself. And funny you say about your own role as a disability champion and your own lived experience of having a disability. One of the things that we have put out as a concept for the staff that would support trust inclusion is that we are considering, is there a way to set a criteria that the person has to have a disability or lived experience of a disability. Now, we aren't getting that language right yet. I'm only saying it's a concept that we're exploring. And the idea behind that, I suppose, is that it's lived experience working with employers and us putting our money where our mouth is almost, and having people employed in this team to advocate and champion the cause. So it's something we're exploring at the minute. We're nowhere near there yet. Obviously, we would need to jump through the necessary hoops with HR and obviously yourselves and engagement, but it's just something that we're exploring.
Thanks very much.
No, that's okay. Brian, I know you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm actually on the same course as Jackie, and I found it very beneficial. I have a son who is 17 going on 18 at special school, so we found the support from the careers to be superb. Plus the fact that the guys that are doing it are based in the same office as myself, and I'm a JBO, so I sort of get a step up the ladder with them, but the support we've received is very good. So I was sort of answering Jackie's question really, but I think it'd be a great idea regarding the more knowledge that's passed around and the more the more disability champions are there and are able to supply, like you say, lived experience, you know, with no matter what range of disabilities people have, I think it's a fantastic idea. That's basically it.
No, thanks for that, Brian. And it's good to hear a positive story of the careers advice piece. Quite often when we engage people that have had negative experiences come forward and give us their experience, and that can skew it sometimes, but it's always good to hear a positive piece as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I see Roger's put a comment in there thanking you for this presentation and saying that as a trade union we need to be at the forefront fighting for equality. If we've no other questions or comments, we can maybe wrap this up. As Stephen has said, I sit on, along with Claire Moore from NIPSA Equality, on the as part of the co-design group. So I'm happy enough to feed anything back to Stephen that you want to raise at any stage as well. So, and we look forward to working closely with you, Stephen, to hopefully get this in place and see more disabled people, because it was one of the figures that I took back from the Harkin Summit, was that Northern Ireland isn't a good place to be disabled and to get into full-time or even part-time work, and that is something that we all need to work together to try and improve. So yeah. I'd like, yeah.
I would echo that. I was just going to say I would echo that, Tina, entirely. And I suppose just from me, thanks for the opportunity to present. It's always a pleasure to kind of have a captive audience that is willing to listen to me. So for an hour as well, that's some goal.
Okay, then we'll just leave to thank, and obviously thanking Geraldine for organising this on behalf, and for our disability champions, new and old, not age-wise, just like the time you've been doing this work. We try and organise an event again, maybe in a couple of months, and hopefully, if you have any ideas or suggestions that you'd like us to maybe focus on, just let Geraldine know and we can bring that to the Equality Committee. Geraldine, anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Tina, no, I think you've said it all. It's just to really thank yourself and Stephen. Stephen, thank you so much for being here today and giving up your time. I know you're a busy person, so we do really appreciate you attending our session today and updating us in terms of where we are with the strategy. So thank you so much indeed, and thank you all for your attendance here today, and hope you find today's session beneficial.
Okay, thank you everybody, bye.